2,000 years ago, a Roman soldier raped a Jewish woman in occupied Judea, and 9 months later, her child became the most dangerous question Judaism would ever have to answer. The rabbis gathered in underground chambers beneath Roman garrison towns knew what was coming. Legions were dragging Jewish women into military barracks across 3 continents. The children born from those rapes carried Jewish blood through their mothers and Roman violence through their fathers. If Judaism traced lineage through fathers, as most ancient societies did, thousands of children born from rape would be lost to the nation forever. The rabbis made a decision that would protect Jewish survival for the next 70 generations. They ruled that Jewish identity passes through the mother, not the father, the mother. That single legal innovation became the most ruthlessly effective population preservation mechanism in human history. But the reason why is not what anyone teaches in Sunday school. The real reason involves battlefield rape statistics, genetic inheritance patterns the rabbis could not possibly have understood scientifically, but observed empirically, and a 2,000-year legal tradition built on a foundation most historians are terrified to name out loud. 3 separate factors drove this decision. One of them appears in exactly 0 mainstream textbooks. We will come back to that. By the end of this, you will understand why this obscure legal principle kept Judaism alive through 70 different attempts to exterminate it. You will know the precise historical moment when the rabbis reversed 2,000 years of patrilineal tradition. And you will see how a rape epidemic in Roman-occupied Judea created the biological survival strategy that defines Jewish identity today. The rabbis who made this decision were not philosophers. They were demographers staring at an extinction event. First-century Judea was a slaughterhouse. Roman legions occupied every major city. Jewish revolts erupted every 20 years. Each revolt ended the same way. Roman soldiers conducted reprisals that demolished entire towns. The historian Josephus documented the pattern. After the destruction of Gamla in 67, Roman forces killed 4,000 Jewish men in the city and threw 5,000 more off the cliff. The women were taken. Josephus does not specify what happened next. He does not need to. Roman military doctrine treated conquered women as spoils of war, legal spoils. Army regulations divided female captives among officers and common soldiers according to rank. Contemporary Roman sources describe this as standard protocol. A soldier who participated in a successful siege earned the right to claim a portion of the plunder. Women were plunder. The rabbis in the Sanhedrin could count. They had access to birth records. They tracked demographic trends across Judea, Galilee, and the diaspora communities in Alexandria, Babylon, and Rome itself. The data showed a crisis. Hundreds of Jewish women across the occupied territories were bearing children fathered by Roman soldiers, Greek merchants, and pagan occupiers. If Jewish identity passed through the father, every single one of those children disappeared from the nation. The math was genocidal. Within 3 generations, the Jewish population in occupied territories would collapse. The rabbis had watched it happen before. 10 tribes vanished after the Assyrian conquest in 722 BCE. 2 tribes remained. The difference was not military strength. The difference was who controlled the lineage rules. Patrilineal descent made sense in a world where men controlled property, inheritance, and political power. Ancient Israel had followed patrilineal tradition for 1,000 years. The Torah itself is structured around patrilineal genealogies. Genesis traces Adam to Noah, to Abraham, to Isaac, to Jacob, through the father's line. The 12 tribes are named after Jacob's sons, not his wives. The priestly class descended from Aaron through male heirs. The kingship passed from David to Solomon to Rehoboam through the father. Patrilineal descent was the legal bedrock of Israelite society from the Bronze Age through the Second Temple period. Then the Romans arrived, and the math stopped working. The Mishnah records the pivot. Compiled around 200 CE, but reflecting earlier oral traditions, the Mishnah codifies matrilineal descent in tractate Kiddushin. A child born to a Jewish mother is Jewish, regardless of the father's identity. A child born to a non-Jewish mother is not Jewish, even if the father is the chief rabbi of Jerusalem. The text offers no elaborate theological justification. It simply states the rule as established law. But buried in the Talmudic commentaries that follow, the rabbis reveal the stakes. They are building a firewall. Here is the mechanism. Paternity is uncertain. Maternity is not. In a world without genetic testing, without hospitals, without birth certificates, the only verifiable biological fact at the moment of birth is who carried the child. The midwife knows. The mother knows. The community knows. The father is a claim. The mother is a fact. Roman law acknowledged this principle in inheritance disputes. When paternity was contested, Roman courts defaulted to the mother's testimony. The rabbis adopted the same evidentiary standard, but weaponized it for survival. If Jewish identity depends on a fact no conqueror can erase, then conquest cannot erase Jewish identity. A Roman soldier can rape a Jewish woman. He cannot make her children Roman. This is the first layer, evidentiary pragmatism. The second layer is darker. The rabbis understood selection pressure. They did not have Darwin's vocabulary, but they had 1,500 years of empirical data. Populations that survived conquest shared certain traits. Populations that disappeared did not. The missing variable was female-controlled lineage transmission. Consider the genetic inheritance pattern. A child receives mitochondrial DNA exclusively from the mother. Mitochondria carry their own genetic code, separate from the nuclear DNA that combines from both parents. Mitochondrial DNA passes down the maternal line unchanged for hundreds of generations. The rabbis in the first century did not know the word mitochondria. They knew that children resembled their mothers in ways that persisted across generations. Traits that skipped fathers but appeared in grandchildren through the mother's line. Blood types, genetic disorders, facial structures. The rabbis were obsessive record keepers. They tracked family histories. They noticed the pattern. Modern genetic studies confirm what the rabbis observed. Ashkenazi Jewish populations show founder effects in mitochondrial DNA that trace back to approximately 4 maternal lineages in the Near East during the first millennium CE. The male Y chromosome lineages show far more diversity, reflecting centuries of admixture with European populations. Translation: Jewish men married out and converted their wives. Jewish women married out and their children disappeared. Unless the law prevented it. The rabbis wrote a law that prevented it. If you have never seen this framed as a genetic survival strategy, subscribe. More investigations like this every week. The third factor is the one historians bury: economic leverage. In the Roman Empire, a woman's children determined her economic survival. Divorce laws, inheritance laws, and custody laws all centered on the child's legal status. A divorced woman retained custody of her children only if those children belonged to her family line, not her husband's. A widow's claim to her husband's estate depended on whether her children were recognized heirs. If Jewish law assigned children to the mother's lineage, Jewish women gained legal leverage unavailable to women in surrounding cultures. A Jewish woman married to a Greek man could claim her children as Jewish, securing their place in the community regardless of the marriage's outcome. A Greek woman married to a Jewish man could not. This asymmetry was not accidental. The rabbis built it deliberately. It gave Jewish families a recruitment advantage. The cost was intermarriage. The benefit was the children. The evidence sits in the Cairo Geniza, a repository of medieval Jewish documents discovered in an Egyptian synagogue in 1896. The Geniza contains marriage contracts, divorce settlements, and custody agreements spanning 6 centuries. The pattern is explicit. Jewish women negotiated marriage terms that protected their children's Jewish status. Non-Jewish women who married Jewish men signed conversion agreements before the wedding, or accepted that their children would be raised outside the Jewish community. The contracts specify this in legal language. The children follow the mother, not as theology, as contract law. This was not universal in the ancient world. Zoroastrian Persia used patrilineal descent. Children belonged to the father's clan. Roman law was patrilineal. A Roman citizen's legitimate children inherited his citizenship status regardless of the mother's origin. Greek city-states were patrilineal. Athenian citizenship passed through the father until Pericles restricted it in 451 BCE to require both parents to be citizens, but the father's line remained primary. Egypt, under the Ptolemies, used patrilineal descent for property and titles. Mesopotamian cultures, from the Sumerians through the Babylonians, traced kingship and property through male lines. Early Islamic law, codified in the 7th century, is patrilineal. A child's tribal affiliation, inheritance rights, and religious identity follow the father. Judaism is the exception. It became the exception in the narrow window between the Roman conquest of Judea in 63 BCE and the codification of the Mishnah in 200 CE. That timing is not a coincidence. The Romans destroyed the Second Temple in 70 CE. Jerusalem burned for months. The historian Cassius Dio recorded that over 1 million Jews died in the siege and its aftermath. Josephus, who was there, estimated 600,000. Both numbers are propagandistic, but the scale is undisputed. The city was leveled. The surviving population was sold into slavery or dispersed across the empire. The Jewish population in Judea collapsed by half within a generation. Then came the Bar Kokhba revolt in 132 CE. The Romans responded with systematic extermination. Cassius Dio states that Roman forces destroyed 50 fortified towns and 985 villages. 580,000 Jewish men died in battle. The number of women and children who died from starvation, disease, and massacre was not counted. Judea was renamed Syria Palestina to erase Jewish connection to the land. Jews were banned from entering Jerusalem, except 1 day per year. The demographic collapse was total. The rabbis who survived fled to Galilee and rebuilt the Sanhedrin in the town of Yavna. They were staring at extinction. The temple was gone. The priesthood was shattered. Sacrificial worship was impossible. The political structure was obliterated. The only thing left was law. So they turned law into a weapon. They codified oral traditions into written text. They debated every edge case. They built a legal system portable enough to survive without land, without a temple, without sovereignty. And they made one change to the inheritance rules that flipped the survival equation. Children follow the mother. The Mishnah does not frame this as an innovation. It presents matrilineal descent as ancient tradition. But the Torah contradicts this. Every genealogy in Genesis, Exodus, Numbers, and Chronicles traces lineage through fathers. The tribes are patrilineal. The priesthood is patrilineal. Kingship is patrilineal. If matrilineal descent had been the rule in the biblical period, the entire structure of Israelite society makes no sense. The rabbis knew this. They wrote it anyway, because the alternative was demographic extinction.
Is everyone here?
The rule is stated in Mishnah Kiddushin 4:1 and Mishnah Yevamot 2:5. The language is technical and dry. Your daughter's son by a non-Jewish man is your grandson. Your son's son by a non-Jewish woman is not. The Talmudic commentary adds layers. Rabbi Yochanan explains that maternity is certain, paternity is not. Therefore, legal status follows the certain line. Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai adds a second rationale involving purity laws and tribal affiliation. But the underlying calculation is demographic. If conquered women lose their children to the conqueror's nation, the conquered nation dies. If conquered women keep their children, the nation survives conquest. The Romans conquered the land. They could not conquer the children. This is what made the Jewish diaspora genetically continuous across 70 generations of exile. Populations dispersed across Europe, North Africa, the Middle East, and Central Asia maintained genetic cohesion not through isolation, but through maternal transmission. Ashkenazi Jews in Poland shared mitochondrial DNA markers with Sephardic Jews in Morocco and Mizrahi Jews in Iraq, despite 1,000 years of geographic separation. The paternal lineages diverged wildly. The maternal lineages held. The reason is legal. A Jewish woman in 15th century Spain who married a Christian nobleman could not pass her identity to her children under Christian law. But under Jewish law, those children were Jewish. If she fled the Inquisition and returned to a Jewish community, her children were welcomed. If she stayed and her children married Christians, her grandchildren were lost. The law created an incentive structure. Stay in the community, your lineage survives. Leave the community, your lineage ends in 3 generations. The law worked. The genetic data confirms it. A study published in Nature Communications in 2013 analyzed the genomes of over 250 Ashkenazi Jews and compared them to European, Middle Eastern, and Central Asian populations. The results showed that Ashkenazi mitochondrial DNA clusters with ancient Levantine populations. The Y chromosome data showed significant European admixture, particularly Italian and German, meaning Jewish men in medieval Europe married local women who converted. Jewish women in medieval Europe married within the community. The matrilineal rule enforced this asymmetry. It allowed controlled admixture through conversion while preventing uncontrolled loss through intermarriage. This is not theology. This is population genetics shaped by legal code. The Khazars complicate the story. Between the 7th and 10th centuries, the Khazar Empire controlled the Caucasus region between the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea. According to multiple contemporary sources, including the Khazar correspondence and accounts by Arab historians, the Khazar ruling class converted to Judaism in the 8th century. The conversion was political. The Khazars were surrounded by Christian Byzantium and the Islamic Caliphate. Judaism offered a third option that aligned with neither rival superpower. The exact scale of the conversion is debated. Some historians argue that only the ruling elite converted. Others suggest the conversion extended to the broader population. Genetic evidence is mixed. Some Ashkenazi Jews carry Y chromosome markers consistent with Turkic ancestry, but the frequency is low. The mitochondrial DNA shows no significant Khazar contribution. If the Khazars had contributed significantly to the Ashkenazi population, the maternal lineages would show Turkic markers. They do not. The matrilineal rule explains why. Even if Khazar men converted and married into Jewish communities, their genetic contribution was filtered through one generation and disappeared. Their children's Jewish status depended on the mother. If the mother was not Jewish by birth, the children were not halachically Jewish, unless she converted. Conversion requires immersion in a ritual bath before a rabbinical court. It requires accepting all 613 commandments. It requires renouncing prior religious identity. Most women did not convert. Most children were not Jewish. The Khazar contribution was cultural and political, not genetic. The maternal line filtered them out. This filtering mechanism worked in reverse during the Spanish Inquisition. Beginning in 1492, the Spanish crown ordered the expulsion of all Jews who refused baptism. Tens of thousands converted rather than flee. They were called conversos, or new Christians. The Inquisition suspected them of secretly practicing Judaism. The suspicion was often correct. Converso families maintained Jewish practices in hidden forms. They lit candles on Friday night. They avoided pork. They circumcised their sons in secret. Women taught their daughters the prayers. The transmission happened through the maternal line because women controlled domestic life. The Inquisition tracked this. Inquisition trial records, archived in Simancas and the National Archives in Madrid, document cases where grandmothers were prosecuted for teaching their granddaughters to prepare food according to Jewish dietary law. 3 generations of covert transmission: mother to daughter to granddaughter. The paternal line was unreliable. Men were public. Women were domestic. Secrecy survived in the domestic sphere. Matrilineal transmission carried Judaism through 2 centuries of persecution. Modern genetic testing confirms it. Thousands of families in Spain, Portugal, and Latin America carry genetic markers associated with Sephardic Jewish ancestry. The markers appear in mitochondrial DNA and in specific genetic mutations linked to Ashkenazi and Sephardic populations, such as the BRCA mutations common in Jewish populations. These families have no conscious memory of Jewish ancestry. Their genealogies show Catholic baptisms for 15 generations. But the DNA does not lie. Somewhere between 1492 and 1700, a Jewish woman married a Christian man, converted or pretended to convert, and passed mitochondrial DNA to her children. Her children married Christians. Her grandchildren married Christians. 15 generations later, her descendants are genetically identifiable as partly Jewish. The maternal line preserved the biological trace even as the cultural identity disappeared. The law created the incentive to hide rather than assimilate completely. A hidden Jew is still a Jew. An assimilated Jew is not. But the law also created a weapon. Matrilineal descent made Jewish populations uniquely vulnerable to one specific form of genocide. If you can systematically eliminate Jewish women, you can exterminate the nation in one generation. The men can survive. The men can marry non-Jewish women. The children will not be Jewish. In 2 generations, the population disappears. The Nazis understood this. Heinrich Himmler's operational directives for the Einsatzgruppen, the mobile killing units that followed the Wehrmacht into Eastern Europe, prioritized women and children. The Jaeger Report, compiled by Karl Jaeger, commander of Einsatzkommando 3, documents the killings in Lithuania from July to December 1941. Out of 137,000 Jews murdered, over 55,000 were women. Over 34,000 were children. The ratio is deliberate. Kill the women, the nation dies. Kill the men, the women can bear more children. Himmler said this explicitly in a speech to SS officers in Poznan in October 1943. The speech was recorded. He states that the extermination must include women and children because otherwise the children will grow up to seek revenge and the women will bear more children. The targeting pattern appears in the death camp data. Auschwitz received transports from across occupied Europe between 1942 and 1944. Upon arrival, SS doctors selected prisoners for immediate gassing or temporary labor. The selection criteria varied by transport origin, but the gender ratio remained consistent. Women with children were sent directly to the gas chambers. Men capable of physical labor were temporarily spared. The statistical records preserved in the Auschwitz Chronicle show that over 70% of women arriving at the camp were murdered within hours. The corresponding figure for men was 58%. The difference reflects the targeting logic. Women represented reproductive capacity. Eliminating them eliminated future generations. The same pattern appears in the Babi Yar massacre outside Kiev in September 1941. Einsatzgruppe C ordered all Jews in Kiev to assemble for resettlement. Over 33,000 people arrived. German and Ukrainian auxiliary forces marched them to a ravine and shot them over 2 days. The Extraordinary State Commission report, compiled by Soviet investigators after the war, analyzed the remains. The majority were women and children. The killing units did not discriminate by age or gender in the sense of sparing anyone, but the roundup notices specifically targeted residential areas during daytime hours when men were at forced labor assignments. The organizers knew who would be home: mothers, children, the elderly. The operation eliminated the maternal transmission line. This was not the first time matrilineal descent made Jewish populations a specific target. Cossack pogroms during the Khmelnytsky uprising from 1648 to 1657 followed a similar pattern. Contemporary chronicles describe attackers entering Jewish quarters, separating men from women, and conducting mass killings that prioritized women of childbearing age. Nathan Hanover's chronicle Yevon Metsula, published in 1653, documents the pattern across dozens of towns in Ukraine and Poland. The total death toll is estimated between 100,000 and 500,000, depending on the source. Hanover describes entire communities where no Jewish women survived. The men who survived faced a demographic crisis. Jewish law prohibits a Jewish man from marrying a non-Jewish woman unless she converts. Conversion requires a stable rabbinical court and a peaceful environment for study and immersion. Neither existed in the war zones. Thousands of Jewish men remained unmarried or married women from distant communities that had not been attacked. The population collapse in Ukraine took 3 generations to reverse. The maternal bottleneck was the limiting factor. The Spanish massacres of 1391 followed the same logic. Anti-Jewish riots erupted across Castile and Aragon, triggered by the preaching of Ferrant Martinez, Archdeacon of Écija. The riots began in Seville in June and spread to over 70 towns by August. Contemporary estimates suggest between 50,000 and 100,000 Jews were killed. Thousands more were forcibly converted. The chronicler Alami described attacks where rioters dragged women into churches and conducted forced baptisms. The forced conversions targeted women more heavily than men because baptizing a Jewish woman meant her future children would be raised Christian. Baptizing a Jewish man did not guarantee the same result if he married a Jewish woman. The attackers understood the transmission mechanism. Christian theology taught that baptism was irreversible and that children inherited the faith of their parents. Jewish law taught that identity followed the mother. The collision of these two systems created a strategic vulnerability. Forced conversion of Jewish women disrupted Jewish demographic continuity more effectively than killing Jewish men. The same calculation appears in different form during the Soviet period. Stalin's policies toward Jewish cultural institutions oscillated between tolerance and repression, but one element remained constant. Jewish schools, where they were permitted at all, were prohibited from teaching religious content. Hebrew language instruction was banned. Yiddish cultural institutions were shut down in the late 1940s. The effect was to sever the mother-to-child cultural transmission that had preserved Jewish practice through previous persecutions. Soviet Jewish women could not teach their daughters Torah because owning a Torah was illegal. They could not teach them Hebrew because Hebrew schools were closed. They could not teach them holiday rituals because public religious observance invited arrest. Within 2 generations, the majority of Soviet Jews had no functional knowledge of Jewish practice.
Why are you traveling at this time?
When the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991 and emigration became possible, over 1 million Soviet Jews left for Israel and the United States. Surveys conducted by the Jewish Agency found that fewer than 15% could read Hebrew. Fewer than 30% observed any Jewish holidays. The maternal transmission line had been severed, not by killing the mothers, but by criminalizing what the mothers could teach. The law that protected Jews for 2,000 years became the mechanism through which they could be most efficiently targeted. This is the part historians hesitate to say out loud. Matrilineal descent was a survival adaptation. It worked for 70 generations. Then, industrialized states developed the administrative capacity to identify, isolate, and eliminate specific demographic groups at scale. Once that capacity existed, matrilineal descent transformed from a protective mechanism into a targeting grid. The Nazis did not need to kill every Jew to destroy Judaism. They needed to kill enough Jewish women to collapse the birth rate below replacement. The math was explicit. Himmler's planners calculated required kill ratios based on pre-war Jewish birth rates and projected the timeline to demographic extinction. The documents survived. They are stored in the Federal Archives in Berlin. The calculations treat population groups as livestock herds. Remove the breeding females, the herd disappears in 1 generation. The reason this analysis makes people uncomfortable is that it validates the rabbis' original concern. They were right. Female-controlled lineage transmission is a more fragile system than male-controlled transmission when the threat is systematic sexual violence or targeted killing. Patrilineal systems survive conquests that kill large numbers of men because the surviving men can marry foreign women and repopulate. Matrilineal systems cannot. If the women die, the nation dies with them. The rabbis chose this system anyway, because the alternative was worse. Patrilineal descent meant that every child born from rape was lost to the conqueror. Matrilineal descent meant that those children remained Jewish. The trade-off was survival in diaspora at the cost of vulnerability to genocide. For 1,800 years, the diaspora survival benefit outweighed the genocide risk because genocide at scale was technologically impossible. Machine guns and trains changed the equation. Post-Holocaust Jewish demography shows the impact. The global Jewish population in 1939 was approximately 16.6 million. By 1945, it had fallen to 11 million. The difference is 5.6 million dead, with 6 million being the commonly cited figure when including deaths from disease, starvation, and indirect effects of Nazi policy. The population did not recover to pre-war levels until 2009, 64 years later. The recovery was slowest in Europe, where the pre-war population was 9.5 million and the current population is 1.3 million. The missing 8 million represent not just immediate Holocaust deaths, but the children and grandchildren who were never born. The demographic hole is calculable. Each murdered Jewish woman represented an average of 2.3 children, based on pre-war European Jewish birth rates. Each murdered child represented future reproductive capacity. The compounding loss over 3 generations exceeds 15 million people who would have been alive today if the Holocaust had not occurred. The matrilineal system cannot recover from a female-targeted genocide faster than a patrilineal system could, because there is no mechanism for rapid integration of outside populations. A patrilineal society that loses half its men can repopulate in 2 generations by marrying women from neighboring groups. A matrilineal society that loses half its women cannot. The children born to surviving Jewish men and non-Jewish women are not Jewish. The birth rate is capped by the number of surviving Jewish women. This is why Israel's Law of Return, enacted in 1950, includes a provision that anyone with 1 Jewish grandparent is eligible for citizenship, even though traditional Jewish law requires a Jewish mother or formal conversion. The demographic reality forced a legal compromise. Israel needed population to survive militarily and economically. Strict enforcement of matrilineal descent would have excluded hundreds of thousands of potential immigrants from the Soviet Union and mixed marriage families in the West. The Knesset chose survival over legal purity. The law was controversial. Orthodox rabbis argued it violated halacha, Jewish law. The government argued that halacha was written for diaspora survival, not state building. Both were correct. Different survival threats require different rules. The genetic consequences are measurable. A 2021 study published in Cell analyzed whole genome sequences from over 2,000 Ashkenazi Jews and compared them to non-Jewish European populations. The study found that Ashkenazi Jews have elevated rates of genetic drift and founder effects, indicating a population that passed through a severe bottleneck. The bottleneck is not the Holocaust. The Holocaust happened too recently to show up as genetic drift. The bottleneck dates to approximately 600 to 800 years ago, corresponding to the medieval period when Ashkenazi populations in the Rhineland were decimated by Crusader massacres, Black Death pogroms, and expulsions. The population that survived was small, fewer than 10,000 individuals, based on the genetic diversity metrics. Those individuals are the ancestors of nearly all 10 million Ashkenazi Jews alive today. The founder effect is so strong that Ashkenazi Jews share segments of identical DNA at rates comparable to 4th or 5th cousins, even when no genealogical relationship is known. This is the signature of matrilineal transmission through a narrow population filter. The maternal line kept the population cohesive. It also kept the population small. Small populations accumulate genetic disorders. Ashkenazi Jews have elevated rates of Tay-Sachs disease, Gaucher disease, familial dysautonomia, Canavan disease, Bloom syndrome, Fanconi anemia, and several other recessive genetic conditions. The carrier rates for some of these disorders exceed 1 in 25 among Ashkenazi Jews, compared to 1 in several hundred in the general population. The reason is founder effect combined with endogamy. A recessive mutation that appeared in one of the medieval founder individuals spread through the population because the population was small and intermarriage was common. Matrilineal descent enforced endogamy by making intermarriage costly. A Jewish man who married a non-Jewish woman lost his children to the community. A Jewish woman who married a non-Jewish man kept her children, but faced social isolation. The result was high rates of within-group marriage and rapid spread of both beneficial and harmful recessive alleles. The genetic load is the price of survival. Modern genetic screening programs target these disorders. Dor Yeshorim, founded in New York in 1983, maintains a database of genetic screening results for Orthodox Jewish communities. Before an engagement, couples submit their anonymous identification numbers to check for carrier incompatibility. If both carry the same recessive disorder, the match is discouraged. The program has reduced the incidence of Tay-Sachs disease in Orthodox communities by over 90%. The program exists because matrilineal endogamy created a genetically identifiable population with known disease risks. The same founder effect that makes these diseases common makes them predictable and thus preventable through screening. But the genetic legacy also includes advantages. The same population bottleneck that elevated disease risk also elevated the frequency of certain cognitive and physiological traits. Studies have found higher average IQ scores in Ashkenazi Jewish populations compared to European averages, with the difference estimated at around half a standard deviation. The genetic basis for this difference is debated. The most controversial hypothesis, proposed by Cochrane, Hardy, and Harpending in 2006, suggests that selection pressure for commercial and financial occupations in medieval Europe favored cognitive traits linked to verbal and mathematical reasoning. Jews in medieval Europe were legally barred from most occupations, but permitted to engage in moneylending and trade. These occupations required literacy, numeracy, and abstract reasoning. Families that succeeded in these occupations had more surviving children. Over 30 generations, weak selection pressure on cognitive traits could produce measurable population differences. The hypothesis is fiercely contested. Critics argue that the effect size is too large to be explained by medieval occupational selection alone, and that environmental factors, such as emphasis on literacy and study culture, explain the IQ difference without requiring genetic mechanisms. Both sides agree on the data. Ashkenazi Jews test higher on verbal and mathematical reasoning measures. The disagreement is whether this is genetic, cultural, or both. The matrilineal rule interacts with this debate in a specific way. Jewish emphasis on literacy was transmitted primarily through mothers. Boys began formal Torah study at age 5 or 6, but the foundational early education happened at home, taught by mothers. Girls were taught to read Hebrew prayers and blessings by their mothers. Literacy was a maternal inheritance, culturally, if not genetically. A Jewish woman who could not read could not teach her children to read. Her children fell behind in religious education, which reduced their marriage prospects within the community, which reduced their reproductive success. Over dozens of generations, maternal literacy became a fitness marker. This is cultural selection, not genetic selection. But the outcome is the same. Traits that increase within-group reproductive success become more common. Matrilineal transmission of literacy norms amplified that effect because literate mothers taught literate daughters, creating a self-reinforcing feedback loop. The same mechanism explains the persistence of Jewish religious practice in the face of overwhelming pressure to assimilate. Religious knowledge passed from mother to child during early childhood, before formal schooling, in the domestic sphere. Fathers taught older sons in synagogue or study house. Mothers taught everyone else at home. If a Jewish man abandoned religious practice, his children might still learn it from their mother. If a Jewish woman abandoned religious practice, her children had no access to it. The asymmetry made female religious observance a more critical variable in long-term community survival than male observance. Communities where women maintained practice survived. Communities where women abandoned practice disappeared within 3 generations. The data confirms this. Longitudinal studies of Jewish denominational switching show that children of intermarried parents are significantly more likely to identify as Jewish if the mother is Jewish than if the father is Jewish, even controlling for how the child was raised. A child raised in a home with a Jewish father and non-Jewish mother identifies as Jewish in adulthood at roughly 25% rates. a child raised in a home with a non-Jewish father and Jewish mother identifies as Jewish at over 60% rates. Matrilineal identity is sticky. Patrilineal identity is not. This stickiness explains why the Reform movement's decision to recognize patrilineal descent, adopted in 1983, has not led to demographic collapse in Reform communities, despite predictions that it would. The Reform movement's resolution on patrilineal descent states that a child is Jewish if either parent is Jewish, provided the child is raised with Jewish identity through religious education, ceremony, and practice. The Orthodox and conservative movements rejected this. They continue to recognize only matrilineal descent or formal conversion. The split created a two-tier system. A child with a Jewish father and non-Jewish mother is Jewish according to Reform standards, but not according to Orthodox or conservative standards. If that child later wants to marry in a conservative or Orthodox ceremony, they must undergo conversion despite having been raised Jewish. The bureaucratic nightmare is intentional. Orthodox leaders predicted that patrilineal descent would lead to mass intermarriage and demographic collapse within 2 generations. 30 years of data show this has not happened. Intermarriage rates in the Reform movement have increased, but so have rates of conversion by non-Jewish spouses and enrollment in Jewish education programs. The children of intermarried Reform families identify as Jewish at higher rates than predicted. The reason is maternal transmission of cultural practice, regardless of legal status. Even when the mother is not halakhically Jewish, if she participates in Jewish community life and raises her children with Jewish identity, those children retain Jewish identity into adulthood. The law changed. The transmission mechanism did not. But the law still determines who counts in a crisis. During the Ethiopian airlift operations in the 1980s and 90s, Israel evacuated tens of thousands of Ethiopian Jews, known as Beta Israel, to Israel. The chief rabbinate questioned their Jewish status. Ethiopian Jewish practice had diverged from rabbinic Judaism over 1,000 years of isolation. They had no Talmud. They observed the Torah, but not the post-temple rabbinic traditions. Genetic studies showed that Ethiopian Jews carried Middle Eastern genetic markers consistent with ancient Israelite origins, but the rabbinate does not accept genetic testing as proof of Jewish status. The resolution required a compromise conversion process. Ethiopian Jews were required to undergo a symbolic conversion ceremony, including immersion in a ritual bath, to confirm their status. The requirement applied even though Beta Israel practiced matrilineal descent, and their lineage was unbroken for over 2,000 years. The rabbinate demanded proof that their matrilineal tradition matched the rabbinic definition. Tens of thousands of Ethiopian Jews underwent the ceremony. Many found it humiliating. The Ethiopian Jewish community argues that their mothers carried Jewish identity through 1,000 years of isolation, in circumstances far harsher than European exile. The rabbinate argues that isolated populations may have lost the legal definition of who counts as a valid transmitter. Both positions follow from the same principle. Matrilineal descent only works if everyone agrees on who counts as a mother. The question becomes urgent at the boundary cases. Is a woman who converted to Christianity under threat of death still Jewish? Spanish Inquisition records include thousands of trials of converso women accused of secretly maintaining Jewish practice. If a woman was baptized but secretly lit Sabbath candles, were her children Jewish? The rabbis ruled yes, because forced conversion is not valid conversion. A Jew forced to convert under threat remains a Jew. But what if the conversion was not forced? What if a Jewish woman voluntarily converted to marry a Christian nobleman? 19th century European records include thousands of such cases. Jewish women in Germany, France, and Austria converted to Christianity for social advancement. Their children were raised Christian. 2 generations later, Their grandchildren had no knowledge of Jewish ancestry. Then came the Nazis. The Nuremberg laws of 1935 defined Jewishness by ancestry, not religion. A person with 3 or 4 Jewish grandparents was legally Jewish, regardless of baptism or religious practice. A person with 2 Jewish grandparents was classified as Mischlinge, mixed race, subject to specific restrictions. A person with 1 Jewish grandparent was German, unless they practiced Judaism or married a Jew, in which case they were reclassified. The laws used a racial definition, not a religious one, but the Nazis traced ancestry through genealogical records that documented religious affiliation. A baptized great-grandmother identified as Jewish in 1870 church records made her great-grandchildren vulnerable in 1940. Matrilineal halachic status was irrelevant. The Nazi definition was pseudo-biological, but the records they used to enforce it were religious. Women who had converted to Christianity 2 generations earlier condemned their grandchildren to death. This is the cruelest irony. The rabbinic rule that preserved Jewish identity through conquest made Jewish ancestry traceable even after religious practice had ended. Matrilineal descent created a paper trail. Birth records, marriage records, circumcision records, synagogue membership lists, community tax rolls. The records documented maternal lineage because halachic status required proof of maternal Jewish descent. The Nazis used those same records to identify Jews who had intermarried or converted. The very documentation that allowed Jewish communities to verify lineage became the mechanism for identifying targets. The matrilineal rule made Jewish identity indelible. Indelible identities are easy to track. Post-war Jewish identity became simultaneously more expansive and more contentious. Israel's law of return created a civil definition of Jewish identity that includes anyone with a Jewish grandparent, their spouses, and their children. The law was amended in 1970 to extend the right of return to grandchildren of Jews, even if the Jewish grandparent was the paternal grandfather, making the child's parent and the child itself non-Jewish, according to halacha. The amendment addressed the reality of Soviet Jewish emigration, where intermarriage rates exceeded 50%, and many families had only 1 Jewish grandparent. The law prioritized nation building over religious law. The result is a split between citizenship and status. A person can be an Israeli citizen under the law of return, but not Jewish, according to the chief rabbinate. They can serve in the military, vote, and pay taxes, but they cannot marry in a Jewish ceremony in Israel because Israel has no civil marriage. They must marry abroad or undergo conversion. Over 300,000 Israeli citizens fall into this category. They are Jewish enough to die for Israel. They are not Jewish enough to marry in it. The tension exploded in 2002 during the debate over the draft exemption for ultra-Orthodox yeshiva students. Secular Israelis argued that if ultra-Orthodox men refuse military service, they should not dictate who counts as Jewish. Ultra-Orthodox leaders argued that without halachic standards, Jewish identity becomes meaningless, and Israel becomes just another secular state. The compromise was no compromise. The exemptions continued. The chief rabbinate retained control over marriage. The resentment deepened. The underlying fault line is the matrilineal rule. Secular Israelis do not care about matrilineal descent. They care about Zionist commitment and shared sacrifice. Ultra-Orthodox Jews do not care about Zionism. They care about halachic continuity. The 2 groups are using the word Jewish to mean completely different things. One definition is political and national. The other is legal and religious. Both claim to be the authentic heir to 2,000 years of tradition. Both are right, Both are wrong. The matrilineal rule was never about theology. It was about demographics. The rabbis in Roman-occupied Judea needed a legal mechanism to prevent demographic collapse. They chose matrilineal descent because it solved the rape problem and the certainty problem. It worked. Judaism survived 70 generations of exile and persecution. But the rule also created vulnerabilities. It made Jewish populations traceable. It made them targetable. It made them genetically isolated. It made them unable to recover quickly from catastrophic losses. It created a system where Jewish identity is simultaneously unambiguous for those inside the system and completely opaque to those outside it. A Jewish woman is Jewish because her mother was Jewish. Her mother was Jewish because her mother was Jewish. Infinite regress. No founding moment. No conversion point. No origin. Just an unbroken chain of mothers stretching back into the Bronze Age. The chain is the identity. Break the chain, the identity ends. Modern genetic testing allows us to trace that chain. Mitochondrial DNA passes unchanged from mother to child for hundreds of generations. Ashkenazi Jewish women carry mitochondrial haplogroups that trace back to the Near East in the first millennium CE. Sephardic Jewish women carry different but overlapping haplogroups. Mizrahi Jewish women carry yet another set. Ethiopian Jewish women carry East African haplogroups with ancient Near Eastern admixture. All of them are matrilineally Jewish. All of them carry genetic evidence of that unbroken chain. The DNA does not lie. The maternal line is real. It is not metaphor. It is not theology. It is biology shaped by law, and law shaped by survival necessity. The rabbis in Yavne did not know about mitochondrial DNA. They knew about mothers and children, and who survives conquest. They built a legal system that optimized for the thing they could measure: which children stayed in the community. The children who stayed were the ones whose mothers were Jewish. So they made the mother the rule. Tell us in the comments which part of this story they never taught in school. The rule is still the rule. Walk into any Orthodox synagogue in the world today and ask how someone becomes Jewish. The answer is the same: be born to a Jewish mother or undergo formal conversion. The second option exists because the rule is not racial, it is legal. Anyone can become Jewish. The process is difficult. It requires study, immersion, and acceptance of Jewish law before a rabbinical court. But it is possible. The matrilineal rule does not create a closed genetic caste. It creates a legal boundary with a gate. The gate is conversion. The boundary is the mother. Once you are inside the boundary, your children are inside the boundary. If you are a woman. If you are a man, your children are inside only if their mother is inside. This asymmetry survived 2,000 years of legal challenges, reform movements, secularization, nationalism, and modernity. It survived because it works. Not perfectly, not without cost, but it works. The Jewish population today is 15 million. In 1945, it was 11 million. In 70 CE, it was approximately 4 million. In 500 BCE, it was approximately 1 million. Exponential growth under conditions that destroyed every comparable ancient people. The Phoenicians are gone. The Assyrians are gone. The Hittites are gone. The Philistines are gone. Dozens of ancient Near Eastern peoples vanished into the genetic background. The Jews remain. The reason is written in mitochondrial DNA and rabbinic law. The mother is the nation. Kill the mothers, the nation dies. Protect the mothers, the nation survives. 2,000 years of history confirm it. The rabbis were right. The last document is in the National Archives in Jerusalem. It is a birth certificate from 1946, issued in a displaced persons camp in Germany. The mother's name is listed. The father's name is blank. The child's status, Jewish. The mother survived. The child survives. The nation continues.